Was I wrong for completely cutting off the people who raised me after they confessed on my 18th birthday that they only adopted me for money, only for me to then inherit $91 million from my biological father the very next day? Seriously, I need to know if you would have done the same thing, because I'm still reeling from the shock, the betrayal, and the sheer unbelievable twist of fate that completely upended my entire life in the span of 48 hours. It feels like a movie, but it was my reality, and I'm still trying to process if my reaction was justified or if I handled it with too much anger, even though I genuinely don't regret a single thing. I mean, imagine your entire childhood being reduced to a financial transaction, only to wake up the next morning as a multimillionaire thanks to the man you never even knew, the very man whose legacy made you an income stream for the people you called mom and dad. The dissonance, the whiplash of those 2 days, it's something I don't think I'll ever fully recover from. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when I genuinely believed I had a normal, if not slightly strained, family life. My name is Alex, and for 18 years, I lived with Sarah and David, the couple I always knew as mom and dad. They weren't overtly affectionate, but they provided for me. I had a roof over my head, food on the table, and I went to a decent school. Looking back, there were always subtle, nagging signs that I chose to ignore or rationalize away because, frankly, the alternative was too painful to contemplate. Things like never seeing baby photos of myself. They'd always say they lost them in a move, a story that felt thin even to my younger ears. Or how they'd always deflect questions about my birth. Parents with vague, cold answers about them not being around anymore. I was an only child, and while many of my friends had siblings, I never felt like I was missing out too much. Instead, I focused my energy inward. I was a quiet kid, spent a lot of time reading, escaping into fictional worlds where families weren't so guarded, and love wasn't something you had to constantly strive for. I had a small but close group of friends, which was my saving grace. My parents, on the other hand, were very focused on appearances. They drove a nice, though not luxurious, car, lived in a respectable, albeit modest, 2-story house in a good neighborhood, and always made sure I had presentable name brand clothes. They needed to look the part of the successful, loving family, and I was their main prop. But behind the suburban facade, our home life was emotionally barren. Dinners were often silent, conversations were usually about school or chores, and any kind of deep, meaningful emotional display was almost non-existent. I can count on one hand the number of times my mother hugged me without me initiating it, and my father was even more reserved, his standard expression a sort of distant neutrality. I attributed it to their personalities, telling myself that some people just aren't outwardly emotional, trying to normalize a situation that was clearly anything but. I tried to be the perfect child, to not cause trouble, to get stellar grades, hoping that my achievements would somehow unlock the key to their hearts, or at least earn me more affection or a deeper connection with them, but it never really materialized. They treated my successes with the same detached approval they treated my failures, a passing grade on a contract. As I grew older, I became increasingly aware of the financial disparities between us and our neighbors. We weren't poor by any means, but we weren't wealthy either, despite their insistence on maintaining a certain lifestyle. My parents worked decent jobs. My mom was an administrative assistant at a mid-sized law firm, and my dad was a mid-level manager at a local manufacturing plant. They often complained bitterly about money, about bills, about how expensive everything was, constantly stressing the need to save. Yet, paradoxically, They always insisted on buying me things that seemed a bit out of our league, things they clearly couldn't comfortably afford, like expensive brand name sneakers or a slightly fancier laptop than my friends had. It was confusing and unsettling. They'd preach frugality, but then spend lavishly on non-essentials for me, almost as if they were performing a duty, checking off boxes on a list of things a good parent must provide. And whenever I pressed them on something practical, like help with filling out college applications or guidance on my uncertain future, they'd get oddly evasive, telling me not to worry about it, that things would work out, or that money wasn't an issue for my future. It felt like they were actively avoiding any long-term emotional or financial planning for my future, which, looking back, was the ultimate red flag. Their involvement ended at 18. My 18th birthday was rapidly approaching, and despite the underlying tension, I was actually excited. It felt like a significant milestone, the long-awaited door to independence. I was looking forward to the freedom that came with legal adulthood, to finally being able to make my own significant choices, and to escape the quiet, judging atmosphere of their home. I had dreams of going to college far away, maybe studying literature or history, and finally figuring out who I was away from them. They planned a small dinner for me at our favorite local Italian restaurant. It was just the three of us, and while I told myself I appreciated the gesture, the atmosphere felt particularly thick with unspoken words and tension that evening. They kept glancing at each other, exchanging hurried, hushed whispers that would stop abruptly the moment I looked their way, or whenever the waiter approached. I tried to dismiss it, assuming they were finalizing a surprise, maybe a trip or a bigger gift, and I desperately tried to ignore the growing knot of cold anxiety in my stomach, the one that always told me something was fundamentally wrong with my life. After dinner, back at the house, we sat stiffly in the living room. My mom had baked a cake, a nice one, I admit, and we went through the usual, somewhat awkward, ritual of singing Happy Birthday. The moment the song was over, my dad cleared his throat, a loud, artificial sound in the silence. Then, they told me they had something important, something life-altering to tell me. My heart started to pound so hard, I thought it might burst through my ribs. This was it, I thought. They're finally going to treat me like an adult, finally tell me the truth about my adoption in more detail, or perhaps offer some real guidance on my college plans. What they said next, however, was a million times worse than any fabricated tragedy or family secret I could have ever imagined. My mom started, her voice shaking slightly, but her eyes were disturbingly cold, devoid of any genuine love or emotion, as if she were reading a corporate memo. "Alex," she began, her words slicing the air, "there's something crucial you need to know about the circumstances surrounding your adoption." My dad chimed in, his tone equally flat and businesslike. "We didn't adopt you for the reasons most people adopt a child, Alex. We didn't adopt you out of love, or because we desperately wanted a family, or because we were infertile." My blood ran absolutely cold. My mind, usually quick, suddenly became thick with confusion, desperately trying to comprehend the sheer, staggering cruelty of their opening statement. Then, my mom, without a shred of visible guilt, dropped the hydrogen bomb. "We adopted you because we were offered a substantial, life-changing amount of money." The words didn't just hang in the air. They exploded, leaving a painful ringing in my ears. I stared at them, my mouth agape, my body frozen, unable to process the naked, brutal truth of their confession. They continued, taking turns explaining the cold, hard facts, how a large, powerful law firm had approached them 18 years ago, looking for a suitable, stable, and unassuming couple to adopt. infant whose biological father was secretly very wealthy, but had passed away unexpectedly, leaving behind a complex, protective will. This father, my biological father, had stipulated in his will that his child, me, should be raised in a normal, unassuming environment, specifically designed to keep me grounded until my 18th birthday, at which point a large trust fund would be activated for my adoptive parents, providing them with a steady stream of significant income for their services. They detailed the specific amounts they had been secretly receiving over the years, a generous monthly stipend that funded our comfortable life, yearly bonuses contingent on my good behavior and progress, and now, today, on my 18th birthday, a massive figure lump sum had been paid out as their final remuneration. This was the money they had been spending, the money that explained the sudden bursts of generosity and the constant, contradictory complaints about being broke. They hadn't struggled. They had been performing their job, and the payment had just gotten significantly, undeniably larger. So, you see, my dad concluded, with a shrug of his shoulders that felt like a physical blow, you were always a financial arrangement, Alex. You served your purpose, and now that you're 18, we've fulfilled our contract and received our final payment. We just thought, as a sign of honesty, you should finally know. The air in the living room felt poisonous. I felt a visceral, gut-wrenching pain that burrowed deep into my soul, a pain far worse than any physical injury. 18 years of my life, every quiet dinner, every perceived moment of encouragement, every shared holiday, was suddenly and irrevocably tainted. It was a transaction, a business deal. I was a project, a means to a comfortable, stable financial life for them, a source of steady income. They looked at me, not with remorse, not with a single tear of apology, but with a strange, entitled mix of self-justification, relief, and a smug expectation. As if they had completed a difficult job, and now it was time for me, the product, to understand the terms of their employment. I finally found the strength to stand up, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, a sound that felt deafening in the silence. I couldn't speak. My throat was constricted with a mixture of disbelief and an almost volcanic rage. I just stared at them, tears finally welling in my eyes, not tears of sadness, but of pure, burning betrayal. I turned on my heel, walked mechanically to my room, grabbed a small, worn backpack, and stuffed it with essentials, my laptop, my wallet, a few changes of clothes, and left the house without uttering a single word. They didn't try to stop me. They didn't call after me. They didn't beg me to stay or try to explain further. They simply let their income source walk out the door, satisfied they had received their final paycheck. I spent that night on the couch of my best friend, Sarah, a different Sarah, thank goodness, numb and in shock, trying to process this gargantuan, life-defining lie that had been my entire existence. The next morning, still feeling hollow and like a ghost of my former self, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. It was a formal, precise voice on the other end, introducing himself as a partner from a prestigious, high-end law firm I didn't recognize. They asked me to come in urgently, stating it was regarding my biological father's estate. I went, bewildered, still running on fumes and pure instinct, my mind a painful, confused mess. So that's the absurd, heart-shattering situation I was in. A legal adult, but an emotional orphan, having just learned my entire childhood was a paid gig, a mercenary adoption. And then this completely unexpected, high-stakes phone call comes literally hours later. Before I tell you what happened next in that terrifying glass-walled conference room, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes, after finding out your adoptive parents only took you in for money? Would you have exploded, tried to reason with them, begged for a better explanation, or done what I did and simply walked away? And how would you have felt about answering that mysterious phone call from a lawyer the very next morning? Would you have been hopeful, or just braced for more bad news? I took a cab downtown and walked into the law firm's opulent 30-story office building, feeling completely out of place in my hoodie and backpack. The firm's name was something I'd seen on towering billboards, associated with massive corporate takeovers and high-profile legal victories, certainly not a place I, a newly minted 18-year-old high school graduate, ever expected to be. I was led through hushed corridors into a large, intimidating, mahogany-paneled conference room where a distinguished, silver-haired lawyer, Mr. Harrison, greeted me with an odd mixture of professional formality and genuine sympathy. He started by reintroducing himself and confirming that he was the principal executor of my biological father's will. My biological father, he explained, was a man named Richard Thorne. The name meant absolutely nothing to me, just another piece of the puzzle. He was, according to Mr. Harrison, a brilliant, but intensely private and somewhat eccentric tech entrepreneur who had made an absolute game-changing fortune in the very early days of the Internet. Before it was even mainstream, he had tragically died in a private plane crash when I was just an infant. Mr. Harrison explained that Richard had specifically outlined in his meticulously detailed will that he wanted his only child to be raised away from the corrosive glare of extreme wealth, in a normal, unassuming, and stable environment, a condition he felt was necessary to ensure I grew up with a grounded perspective and strong personal values. To achieve this, he had set up a complex, multi-layered trust, managed by this very law firm, and designated the caretaker payments to my adoptive parents, Sarah and David. He made it clear these payments were strictly conditional on me being raised to a certain standard until the day of my 18th birthday. He had also explicitly stated in the secret codicil of his will that on my 18th birthday, a separate, much larger trust, containing the bulk of his entire estate, would be dissolved and transferred entirely and unconditionally into my name. Mr. Harrison then calmly and professionally presented me with a thick stack of documents, bank statements, and a detailed financial breakdown that made my head spin. My biological father, Richard Thorne, had left me his entire consolidated fortune. The staggering amount was etched in bold black ink: $91 million. $91 million. The numbers swam before my eyes, an impossible, unreal sum. My already shattered mind tried desperately to reconcile the fresh, stinging wound of my adoptive parents' cruel betrayal with the staggering, dizzying reality of this instantaneous inheritance. It felt like a bizarre, truly astronomical practical joke played by the universe. They had raised me for money, and now the money I was inheriting made their combined final payment look like a child's allowance. The sheer, monumental irony of the situation was a slap in the face. Here I was, emotionally annihilated and adrift after being discarded like a finished project, only to discover I was now independently wealthy beyond any possible comprehension. I had gone from feeling like a worthless pawn to the sole owner of a technological empire overnight. Mr. Harrison, sensing my shock, patiently explained all the legalities, the tax implications, and the team of world-class financial advisors who would be immediately assigned to me. It was overwhelmingly technical, but all I could focus on was the callous, money-driven confession of the night before. They had sold me out, traded their parental bond for a fraction of what was rightfully and ultimately mine. I asked Mr. Harrison, my voice barely a whisper, if my adoptive parents knew about the larger, true inheritance. He confirmed that they were only ever made aware of the caretaker payments, stipulated in the initial, smaller trust. The existence of the main $91 million inheritance was kept strictly confidential, to prevent them from potentially altering their behavior, influencing me, or compromising my normal upbringing based on my future, staggering wealth. My biological father had truly done everything he could to protect me from the greed his own fortune often inspired, even in his absence. It was a strange, bittersweet kind of vindication, a hollow victory perhaps, but a definitive victory nonetheless. My adoptive parents had traded the emotional honesty of my entire childhood for what they believed was a substantial payoff, only for me to receive the true inheritance of a lifetime which dwarfed their payoff into insignificance. In that moment, a cold, unwavering resolution settled over me. I decided then and there that I would not let them have any part of this new life or this fortune. They had made their mercenary choice. They had explicitly shown their true, transactional colors. I instructed Mr. Harrison to execute an immediate and permanent no-contact directive between me and Sarah and David, my former adoptive parents. I changed my personal phone number, immediately authorized the firm to find and secure a safe, private residence for me, and started the swift, decisive legal process of formally changing my last name to Thorne, my biological father's name, a name that, at least, represented a biological truth, rather than the painful lie I had been living. Mr. Harrison handled everything with impeccable discretion and speed, expressing his genuine condolences for the trauma I had been put through. He helped me set up my new life, cautiously and with security as the paramount concern. Given my sudden and very public wealth, the papers started to pick up the story quickly, although they didn't have all the details. I didn't tell any of my friends about the inheritance right away, except for Sarah, the one who took me in. I needed time to breathe, process, and mourn the loss of the life I thought I had. I enrolled in a prestigious online university program, choosing to study from the privacy of my new home for a while, just to get that essential distance and figure out my next monumental steps. I started traveling discreetly, exploring new places and finding a quiet space to slowly start the painful process of healing from the emotional wound that had been inflicted. A few months later, despite the legal firewall, I received a thick, heavy envelope forwarded to me from Mr. Harrison's firm, a desperate, tear-stained letter from Sarah and David. They had somehow managed to get wind of the true size of the inheritance, likely from some obscure, mandatory legal notice that they or their lawyer had intercepted. And they were, predictably, absolutely incandescent with rage and greed. The letter was a grotesque blend of accusations, manipulative self-pity, and thinly veiled attempts to reconnect, all driven by the desire for a piece of the $91 million. They claimed they had been wronged, that they deserved a finder's fee, or a large share, that they had raised me according to his terms, and that I was being the most ungrateful, spiteful child imaginable. It was a desperate, grasping plea disguised as an angry, entitled demand. I didn't even finish reading it. I handed it back to Mr. Harrison and instructed him to issue a cease and desist order with the sternest possible language. My heart, once shattered, had solidified into a rock-hard core of self-preservation. There was absolutely no going back, no forgiveness to be found. They had given me a contractually obligated childhood, and in return, I was giving them nothing. Now I was truly free of that contract, living my life on my own terms, with my own money, and I was going to build my own future, one based on genuine love and connection, not on cynical financial arrangements. It was the most painful, shocking lesson imaginable, but ultimately the most profound. I learned the true, priceless value of real, unconditional love, and I learned to trust the cold, hard instincts that told me to walk away and never look back. So, tell me, was I wrong to cut them off entirely? Was my anger justified in the face of such calculated betrayal? Or should I have been the bigger person and offered them some kind of closure or even financial assistance, given that they did, technically, put a roof over my head for 18 years? Let me know your final, honest thoughts in the comments below. Like this video if you were entirely on my side. Subscribe to the channel for more shocking, true stories like this, and share your final thoughts on this whole unbelievable mess in the comments section. I'll see you all in the next story.